Hello and welcome to Nithrania Game Club. My name is Branislav Berec and you're watching Game in a Nutshell, the series of videos designed for explaining the rules of various board games. Today, we're going to learn how to play Iwari from Thundergriff Games. To set the game up, place the game board and the scoring table in the middle of the table. Each player takes all tents and totems of one color, and then places one tent on the zero space of the scoring track. There are 4 sets of these area connections with this mountain symbol. This one has 1 peak, this one has 2 peaks, these 2 have 3 peaks, and these have 4 peaks. In a 5-player game, randomly choose one of the connections with this 1 peak and place this mountain token over that connection. In a 4-player game, do the same thing with the connection with 2 peaks. Again, randomly choose one of those connections and cover it up with the mountain token. For a 3-player game, repeat the process for the connections with these 3 peaks, and in a 2-player game, you would have to cover up one of those connections with 4 peaks. Since I will be demonstrating a 4-player game, only 2 mountain tokens are needed, and only those that cover up the connection with 2 peaks and with 1 peak. Randomly determine the starting player, who will get the first player token. Then shuffle all the cards and you can use the entire deck in a 5-player game. In a 4-player game, remove 1 card from each suit, and in a 2 and a 3-player game, remove 2 cards from each suit. Then each player will randomly draw 3 cards, and then draw top 4 cards from the deck and place them face up next to the draw deck. You can also use the advanced version where you draw this display first, and then in the reverse player order, players will draw the starting 3 cards either from the top of the deck or from the display. Once the player has drawn all 3 cards, you can refill the display from the draw deck. Then continue with the next player. Players take turns, starting with the first player and then continuing in a clockwise direction. On your turn, you have 2 options. You can either play up to 3 cards from your hand to place tents and totems on the game board, or you can simply discard a card and draw 1 new card. When the draw deck gets exhausted for the first time in the game, score tent majority on the game board. When the draw deck gets exhausted for the second time in the game, you would score majority of the tents in each area, then you would score majority of totems, and you would also score settlements, which is the uninterrupted line of tents of one player. With that, the game will end, and the player with the most points is the winner. When you decide to play cards from your hand, choose one territory where you can place pieces this turn. You may not place pieces into multiple territories in a single turn. For 1 card, you can place 1 piece, a tent or a totem, in the territory of the same type or of the same color. So for a green card, 1 piece can be placed into a green territory. If you use 2 cards of the same type, of the same color, you can place your piece into any type of territory. So 2 cards of the same color act as 1 wild card. When you place pieces in unexplored territory, that's a territory with no pieces at all, you can place maximum 1 tent in that territory and nothing else. With that, your turn is over. When you place pieces in explored territory, that's a territory where there is at least 1 tent at the start of your turn, you can place up to 2 pieces in that territory. You can place tents and totems in any combination, and tents can only be placed on these empty black spaces, so each tent space can only be occupied by 1 tent, and totems are placed on these large spaces, and that large space can contain any number of totems of any color. However, that number is limited by the highest number of tents of 1 color in the territory. For example, in this red territory, green player has 3 tents, and that's the highest number of tents of a single color in that territory. That means this totem space can contain maximum 3 totem pieces. As this yellow piece demonstrates, you can place a totem piece in a territory even if you don't have any tents in that territory. So to sum it up, on your turn, you can place pieces in one territory only. You can place up to 2 pieces of any combination. And for each piece, you have to discard the card of the same color as the color of the territory in which you placed your pieces. Or if you don't have a card of that color, you can discard 2 cards of any single color. Then, at the end of your turn, replenish your hand back to 3 cards. You can either take cards from the top of the deck or from the display. Refill the display after you take all the cards. Then it's the next player's turn. In a 2-player game only, let's say red player playing against the yellow player, when you finish your turn and you still have any cards remaining in your hand, you have to take a turn for the 3rd virtual player. You must use at least one of those remaining cards, but you don't have to use all of them. If you would end your turn with no cards in your hand, then you don't take any turn for that 3rd virtual player. This 3rd player acts as another player in the game, but both human players alternate taking turns for this virtual player. However, this 3rd player accumulates points normally in the same way as both human players, so it can even happen that this player wins the game. When the draw deck gets exhausted for the first time in the game, shuffle the discard pile and create a new draw deck, and finish drawing the cards, and then pause the game immediately. Then score the tens in each territory. The player with the most tens in the territory scores 1 victory point for each tent in that territory, regardless of the color. So in this example, yellow player would score 5 victory points. Then the 2nd player, in this case the red player, would score 1 victory point for each tent of the 1st player. So 4 victory points in this case. Move the markers on the scoring track accordingly. To help keep track of which territories have been already scored, use these territory tokens. Now, in this orange territory, red player has 3 tens, both green and the yellow player have 2 tens, and the blue player has 1 tent. So, the red player has the majority, and that means red player would score 8 victory points for this territory. Green and yellow player are tied for the 2nd place. They both share that 2nd place, and they both score 3 victory points. And since both green and yellow players share the 2nd position, the blue player remains in 3rd position, and blue player would score 2 victory points. Continue scoring each territory on the map, and then resume the game normally. When the draw deck becomes exhausted for the 2nd time in the game, again shuffle the discard pile and create a new draw deck, and then finish drawing as many cards as needed. But this time finish the round so that all players had equal number of turns in the game. Then the game would end. Score the tens in the same way as you do at the end of the first half of the game. After that, you will score points for totems. You will score these connections between territories where at least one player has a majority of totems in both of these territories. Remember, if players are tied, they both have the majority. You can score these connections from first to last, and you can use this scoring token to indicate the connection which is currently scored. This connection connects the blue territory with this yellow territory. However, although we have the yellow player present in both territories, in this yellow territory it's the blue player with the majority. So there will be no victory points awarded for this first connection. Then moving on to second connection between the blue territory and this orange territory. Here we have the red player with the majority in both territories, and if that happens, the player would score 1 victory point for each totem in both territories, regardless of the color of those totems. So in this example, red player would score 5 victory points. If the connection has this mountain token over that connection will not be scored. So proceed to the next connection and so on and so forth until you score all the connections on the game board. These connections are called land connections. These are water or sea connections. They act in the same way, So this one connects the yellow territory with this green territory. And finally, you have to score settlements. If a player has at least 4 uninterrupted connected tents, score 1 victory point for each tent in that settlement. Settlements don't have to be in the same line and they can cross regions, so the red player here would score 6 victory points for this settlement. Yellow player would also score 4 victory points. Then tally up all the scores and the player with the most points is the winner. The base game also comes with these feats, which multiply the tent or totem scoring at the end of the game. To place one of those feats on the game board, you have to accomplish a task which is described next to each feat. For example, to place this union feat, you have to be first or second to complete the settlement. Then place the feat into any legal territory, and this union feat doubles the tent scoring at the end of the game. So normally, red player would score 3 victory points for the tents, however, with this feat he would score 6 victory points. Yellow player, being in a second place, would score 2 victory points, with the feat he would score 4 victory points. If there was another feat token in the same territory, the base scoring would be tripled. So the red player would score 3 times 3, 9 victory points, and the yellow player from the second place would score 2 times 3, 6 victory points. You can find the complete description of these feats at the back of the rulebook. So that's how you play Iwari. If you would have any questions or comments, please put them into the comment sections below. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. If you like the series, please subscribe. My name is Branislav Berec. You've been watching Game in a Nutshell and hope to see you next time.